What's up, metal and heavy music fans? Today we are ranking the albums of Linkin Park. Alright, and we're going to start, as we often do at the beginning, with Hybrid Theory in 2000. Amazing album. Like, I absolutely still adore this album. It's definitely like a formative metal album for me. You can argue all day long whether it's metal or not, but it was definitely a gateway after I had gotten into Slipknot and into Korn. This was like the big album. I'd argue it's one of the most important albums of the 2000s, and it kicked off that decade really strong. So many great memories of hearing these songs on the radio. I miss those days. I've said this many times before that I miss hearing songs like this on the radio. There's certain stations that still play them, but I mean like new songs. Like, where are the radio stations that will still take a chance on these types of more metal and heavy and even just rock music in general? We get all like the classic stations that still play all these songs. Not a lot of new stuff. So it was a great time. And this album is just packed with amazing singles. You got Paper Cut, One Step Closer, Points of Authority, Runaway. Of course, In the End, which just got played to death, but I've learned to love it again. I did get sick of it for a while. And then Crawling was like the big monumental single that I probably remember hearing the most and just being so like taken to another place by that song. There was just something about it that was just so infectious. It was like a drug. Just fantastic. And I still love re-listening to this album to this day, which is not something I can say about every album I loved from that time. I think it's just start to finish fantastic. Even the deeper cuts are great. I love A Place for My Head. And then the DJ track too is just really fun. And so yeah, people loved this album. Not just me, clearly. It made number 2 on Billboard. Remember, this is a debut album. So that doesn't happen all that often where a band just blows up on the scene and just kills everything. It just completely blew up beyond. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall. No pun intended with the whole like hybrid bug thing on this album cover. But to see them recording this album and just their response when it came out. Because it's like your brain can't comprehend that kind of success coming from virtually nothing. And not only did it rank high on Billboard, it's also certified 12 times platinum, and it is the best-selling debut album since Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction back in 1987, making it the best-selling rock album of the 21st century. And it also won a Grammy, but nobody gives a fuck about the Grammys. I'm going to put this one at S tier. It should be obvious at this point. So then they followed that up with Meteora in 2003, and I remember highly anticipating this album. Given how much I loved Hybrid Theory, how much I listened to that album, I had a burned copy of it that probably had like holes worn in it from all the times that I had listened to it on my Discman. Yes, I'm a little bit old, but this came out, and I remember being kind of disappointed even back then. Like, it's a good album. And going back to it now, I was kind of wondering, like, okay, will I like it more? Will I appreciate it more? And yeah, I don't know. I still feel about the same about it as I did back then. Great songs on here. Some really solid singles. You got Somewhere I Belong, Faint, Numb is a really great one, From the Inside. Breaking the Habit was another one that you could not escape on the radio waves. So lots of good stuff here. I will say, I don't think any of those singles are as strong as the singles from Hybrid Theory. So even the best songs in this album can't quite measure up to my expectations, and maybe that was unfair on my part. But then, again, like, that was part of going back and listening to it now. Would I feel differently? And I still don't. Like, I still think it's solid. It's a good album. It was enjoyable to listen to, which is more than I can say about some of the other albums we're going to get to. And people loved it, of course. It hit number 1 on Billboard this time, and it went 7 times platinum. So not quite, didn't sell as well, but charted even better. Yeah, I think I'm going to put this one at A tier. Like, I do think this is kind of an overrated album. I hear a lot of people say, like, oh yeah, Hybrid Theory and Meteora as if they're like on the same level. And they're not. They're just not. If I were to grade this album in like a standalone review, it would probably get like a B, but as it stands within their discography, it is definitely second best. All right, then moving along here, this is where things start to get a little dicey, at least for me, and we'll talk about that, but this is Minutes to Midnight in 2007 that we're talking about here. I had kind of fully checked out from the band at this point. By now, I was listening to much heavier stuff. I was kind of moving on to melodic death metal, a lot of Dark Tranquillity. Also was a big Lamb of God fan at this point, and then starting to get into black metal and Meshuggah, and just like working my way kind of up into the heavier and heavier territory. But I just was not really into Linkin Park at this point, and I think for good reason. Listening to this now, I just think it sounds bad too. Like Given Up, the opening track sounds like an unfinished demo with really crummy lyrics too. Like I think it's one of the worst songs they've ever put out. The production is also more of like this garage rock vibe, and it just doesn't work with their music. I think this is the beginning of what I'll begin to call as the Linkin Park identity crisis that I think they went throughout their career. I think that what made those first two albums, and especially Hybrid Theory, so great was the atmosphere and ambience, which was a big part of their sound. And so it makes sense that this is the first album that they did without David Gilmour producing, instead opting to do it with Mike Shinoda from the band and Rick Rubin. You've got some other really sappy tracks on here too, like Leave Out All the Rest, In Between, and The Shadow of Day. Chester sounds good on these tracks, as he pretty much always does. But I gotta ask, like, who wanted this from Linkin Park? Somebody out in the comments let me know. If you, like, love this side of their sound, tell me why. I genuinely want to know, because my goal with these tier lists is not to present some, like, master objective ranking of this is how it is. This is just my opinion, and I'm always interested to entertain other people's perspectives, because it's all valid. I think Shadow of the Day in particular reminds me of U2's With or Without You, except it's less catchy. Like, I can enjoy listening to With or Without You. I can't enjoy listening to this. No More Sorrow has kind of an AFI Miss Murder vibe going on that just makes me want to listen to AFI instead. In Places has ska chords for some reason. I'm not sure what's going on with that one. It really is just kind of all over the place in general, which may have to do with delays during the process of writing and recording and putting it all together. I honestly couldn't even remember the singles going into this one, which is a big shift from the previous era. Like, they were a big singles band early on, but here we are just 3 albums in and already kind of fallen off pretty hard in my opinion. Bleed It Out is okay, I guess. What I've Done is probably the closest thing we get to a classic Linkin Park song, but honestly, I would be fine never listening to this thing again. I'm going to put it at D tier. Then they had 1,000 Suns in 2010. This is a concept album about human fears, such as nuclear war. It's much more experimental, very like drifting, even further from their original sound. Lots of chill, spacey, almost ambient sounding arrangements here that I don't hate, but are also a little bit boring, and a phrase you're going to hear a lot on this tier list, just not what I'm looking for in this band. This is not what I go to them to listen to. I want to hear Crawling. I want to hear In the End. I want to hear that punchy new metal stuff. It's just fun. There are some higher points in the second half, like Blackout and Wretches and Kings, which are decent. Again, like, they can't hold a candle to the earlier stuff, but I did enjoy listening to those. And then, even though it's still kind of on the corny side, Chester gives an absolutely gut-wrenching performance on, I think it's Waiting for the End, and given the additional context of him being gone now, I'm not ashamed to say that when he hits that note for Gone, it makes me tear up a little. I still don't love this album, but I would say it's a better listen than the last one, which felt much more like a chore. I was able to enjoy my time with this. I'm going to put it at C tier. All right, then we got Living Things in 2012, and I actually remember being kind of excited for this album for the first time since Meteora, because they dropped Burn It Down as a single, and that track is, pun intended, absolute fire. Like, I love that song. Every moment of it just gets you pumped. The synth line on it is so hooky and infectious. I have it in my gym playlist, and every time it comes on, I feel like I could run 1,000 miles. It's just so catchy. I love singing along to the chorus, and I do like I'll be on the treadmill doing like imitations of the words that they're saying. It's so lame, but it's so great. Top 10 Linkin Park song easily. And fortunately, there are others like Lost in the Echo and In My Remains, which got me even more stoked for feeling like, okay, maybe this is finally a return to form. Nice to hear Chester actually screaming again too. But after that, it drops off real quick for me. It's not nearly as bad as their worst stuff here. There's really nothing truly offensive to listen to. It's a decent listen. It's an okay album, but I just wish that they had kept the momentum of those first 3 songs, because it's just so strong, and then it just takes a nosedive into kind of mediocrity after that. There's just very little else to chew on, and I was very disappointed. Very, very disappointed, to the point that, like, I listened to it when it came out, and I was just... I'm done again. I dropped out. It was another album, though, that I was hoping maybe coming to it this time with a different perspective and less bias, that maybe I'd enjoy it more. But no, I still had that almost exact same experience of like, oh, this is actually better than I remember. And then I got to that 4th track and was like, oh, nope, never mind. I was right. So I'm still going to put this one at B tier. Like, I think it's probably my 3rd favorite album to listen to in their discography, but it's such a substantial drop from these two. There's a wide separation. There should be a couple tiers between each of those. But let's move on. 2014 gave us The Hunting Party, and so after Living Things let me down like that, I skipped this one, and listening to it now, I really don't regret that decision. This is another one that I don't particularly enjoy. This one leans into more of like an overt rock direction with some pop punk leanings on tracks like War with the D-beats and the guitar riffs. And don't get me wrong, I like that stuff, but I don't really want rock from a band that I got into for metal. And also, like, I want it done better. Like, these are just songs that are not as effective. It feels kind of like they're trying to do Rise Against, but without the memorable songwriting. It's somewhat ironic, as I found a quote from Shinoda about this album saying it was a response to rock bands trying to be other bands and playing it safe. But this is just the most bland, undercooked writing on this album. It's just blah. It's just nothing. It's not bad. It's not in, like, the bottom tier, but... It's definitely not as bad as Minutes to Midnight, but that's a low bar, y'all. And that brings me back to this constant identity crisis that these guys seem to have. It's like they could not decide. They had all these ideas of what they could do and all these different styles and everything, but ultimately, like, you hit it big on that first one and people are going to want more of that because that's how you built your fan base. But it does intrigue me, though, because they continued all the way up until this most recent, we'll call it a hiatus, to carry a large audience, like pretty diehard too. So again, I'm interested in the comments from people like that. Why do you like this? Like, why, genuinely, why, what about it do you enjoy so much? What kept you going? Because to me, it just feels like it's name recognition. And if it didn't have Linkin Park on the marquee, then I don't feel like people would be as positive about it. And not even the guest appearances can save it, in my opinion. And there are some notable ones on here, including Helmet's Paige Hamilton, System of a Down's Darren Malakian, Rage Against the Machine's Tom Morello, and Rakim. It's a perfectly passable album, but not even a single on this one is something I really want to revisit. I'm going to put this one at C tier. But you could do worse, and speaking of which, that brings us to One More Light in 2017, and holy fuck, from the very opening moments on this one, my headache rapidly intensified. Nobody Can Save Me is the most bubblegummy of pop you can find, and that kicks off the album. My one praise is that at least it's produced well for what it is, but this still just feels like the stuff I used to hear played at like Bible camp. As always, this is just my own personal opinion again on the music, and also not to slam the band members as people. Like, Mike Shinoda seems like he's kind of a cool dude. I don't know him personally, obviously. And it's even sad wondering if anxiety about the response to this album could have contributed to Chester's mental health around this time, since he died this same year. Like, I feel like I would definitely be in my head if I was releasing something that was so markedly different from anything else that I had done. And to his credit, his voice sounds great as always. Like, I just don't enjoy the finished product. Like, that's just my personal taste. Always plays into these things. There's no such thing as an objective ranking, I will say. I could totally see how a younger, broader audience might enjoy it, which, you know, not a bad idea, but I personally just don't want to hear Pusha T and Stormies on a Linkin Park album. It's like, if you want to do that, maybe start a new project under a different name, and they were already doing plenty of side projects at this point, but imagine if I suddenly decided one morning to make car maintenance instructionals instead of metal and rock reviews. Would you watch them just because it's me? I'm sure a handful of you troopers out there that are always in the comments, love you guys, maybe would stick around, but even you, and I'm speaking directly to those people now, would probably be sitting there hoping in the back of their head that I would go back to the content that I started with. I will say that Heavy manages to be a pretty effective pop song, even with the ironic title, I guess. But again, it's just not my thing, and ultimately, this one is also a D tier. I am going to put it just a little bit higher than Minutes to Midnight. But y'all let me know how you would rank these albums down in the comments. Check out this playlist for more new metal related tier lists and other content. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.